can't even begin to tell you how blessed I feel in this ministry. We are existing in an entirely different environment. Things have changed. We are doing things that we never thought we would have to do. We are separated. We are in our homes. Those of us with essential jobs are stepping outside of our homes and getting into places where we need to serve others. And it at times has been very frightening. We've had risky moments, but we've continued to be faithful to the work of God. Whether that's in a grocery store or a residential facility or cleaning those places, we have continued the work because we see just how the world needs us, just how our country needs us. And this church has been blessed. Guys, I've been so blessed by what you've done. I've been so encouraged by what you've done. I've been so motivated to more good works by what you have done. You guys have responded in big ways. You've gotten online to our online giving portal. You've responded through sending check and cash. You've done everything possible. Some of you have sent whatever means you have to encourage and bless the work and the ministry that we are doing right here at Lancaster Assembly. And for that, I am so very grateful. Can't even begin to decide how, with the vernacular I have, to define my gratitude towards you. Just know that I am blessed because you have been a blessing. Continue the work. Continue motivating. Continue encouraging. In this morning's sermon, we're going to talk about the idea of fear of the future. This is likely the conclusion of my series, Be Not Afraid. I really thought that at the end of this series, with Easter being in a live stream mode, that we would be moving on. And some states are, but here in New Hampshire, we're still in this position. And many of us, a lot of us, we're looking ahead. We're looking at the world. We're looking at what we're being confronted with, and we're scared. So today, I'm going to pray that you guys would be motivated, that you guys would be encouraged, that you guys would go for it, that you would look the future in the face and not be afraid, that you would look the future in the face and not be afraid. I just want to thank you again for joining us on our live stream this morning. It's getting more familiar, but the struggle of being separated is becoming more familiar. I wanted to experience church together sooner than this. And as we started, the week before and Easter itself in this quarantine and through live stream, I thought, I'm going to start this series about Be Not Afraid. And maybe by the end of 5 weeks of that, we'll be close to, or at least in the beginning stages of gathering together. We know that there's going to be some distinct differences in what church looked like before this and what church looks like after. And so, we're working through this and we're experiencing this whole thing, and it's all new. It's all different. This experience is just created for us some very serious struggles, at least for me specifically, because as I've said every single week, it feels like I miss you all so much. I want to be close to you. I want to pray for you. I want to hug you. And right now, that's just not possible. And so I just ask that somehow, some way, as odd as it sounds, you would take a digital hug. So I'm going to go like this. I want you to go like this as well, and give yourself a hug and say, wow, that's from Pastor. That really felt corny. Anyway, so we are in the 5th message in our series, Be Not Afraid. I really feel like I'm closing up this sermon series with this specific sermon. And we've been talking about different things. Last week, my wife, exceptional message about fearing failure and the struggle with that. But we've been talking about all these different fears that we begin to feel, or being afraid, especially right now as we're in this current situation. A lot of us are experiencing fear in ways that we never thought we would, or we're seeing as our anxiety and our fears being instigated by the current situation, because there may have already been something that is existent within you that you've been struggling or pushing through, and that the thing that was already existent within you has been exacerbated by this current struggle. Some of you, you've been working through this experience, and you have never really struggled with anxiety or fear, but you're there right now. And so, but this morning I want to talk to you about fearing the future. Fearing the future. Before I go any further, I want to pray and just ask God that He would do some pretty marvelous things this morning. Father, I thank you so much for truth. I thank you so much for faithfulness. I thank you, God, that people are responding in very big ways to the needs of the church, and we've been able to bless others. Lord, as we look forward, God, I pray right now that as we hear this morning about our fear in the future, Lord, that you would help us to find things in our heart that need to be ripped out. And God, that our confidence with you and our confidence in you would grow exponentially, Lord, as we begin to face the future. It's in your amazing, incredible name we pray. Amen. You see, if you will, fear becomes the director of our lives. It could be the form of a sitcom. It could be a television drama. It could be a movie, even a symphony. And we find that fear is the director, the conductor. It begins to play this symphony. All the different instruments come in, and you know, the symphony can be beautiful. A conductor can create such a beautiful symphony, but if you've ever listened to music before that a symphony has done, you can find uplift and increase in hope and strength and courage. You can just feel your soul begin to rise. At the same time, when you're listening to orchestra, you can begin to feel broke down and weary and nervous just by the change of instrumental and the change of the progression, the change of the speed or the lack thereof, or how many different instruments are being involved and how those instruments are being presented. And so our life becomes a symphony, and when fear is present, when we become afraid, and we live by that fear, we exist in that fear, we'll begin to notice that our life will play out. Our life will play out what exists there. It's complex and simple. It's complex and simple. Whether it's extensive examination and therapy, or one profound epiphany, discovery realizes that something we are afraid of has been the navigator of life. It's been the direction of our life. It's been what has led us. What has led us, what has directed us in one way or another. It's our navigation system. Whether we have gone to therapy and we begin to unpack some of the things that are happening in our life, and we begin to say, okay, something's going on here, something's not right here, something's not okay. And when we begin to unpack those moments of our lives, we can look back and realize, we can go back and realize that the compass or the direction, the roadmap, whatever phrase you want to put there, has been seriously affected by what we're afraid of. I mean, we've heard the fight or flight. You know, like we've heard the fight or flight moments, whether we stand strong and courageous or take off. And I'll tell you right now, there's some situations that you should just run and get away from. But that fight or flight experience can be, it's something that we do in the moment. But when we begin to exist with that all the time, it brings us direction. You see, when fears dominate us, they tend to become self-fulfilling prophecies. And this is the scary thing. Not only will they become self-fulfilling prophecies, they also help us to not see the story as it is. It's a manipulation of true events. I mean, we've seen people who have produced, media outlets who have produced things on the news. We have seen movies, documentaries, all these different things that have manipulated true events. It has manipulated the things that really happened, and it's telling or it's expressing of the details of those events. We can see as those things have been manipulated for us to see them entirely differently. And when God is moving in our life and doing some powerful things, when we find ourselves fully afraid, we don't even realize that the truth is being manipulated so that we see things in an entirely different way. And our friends, our peers, our loved ones, our pastor, they're all just like, look, you're not seeing it. You're not seeing what's really happening because your development of the story, the development of your life has been affected by your fear. Affected by your fear. It's twisting events to match the worst expectations. Those things become natural. Those things become natural. In 2017, there was a study done, and I don't have time this morning, but there's a list of 50 fears that people have. And it seems so profound to me that these fears that people have are finding themselves being not just present today, but being instigated, if you will. They're growing exponentially because of the current condition. People, 74.5% of those studied fear corrupt government officials. 55.3% healthcare. Pollution of oceans, rivers, and lakes, 53.1%. Not having enough money for the future, 50.2%. High medical bills, 48.4%. The U.S. will be, in the U.S., there will be another world war, 58.4% as well. Global warming and climate change, 48%. All right? North Korea using weapons, 47.5%. Air pollution, 44.9%. And on and on and on. This study talks about the economic and financial crisis and collapse, extinction of plants and animals, terrorist attacks, identity theft, people we love dying, people we love becoming seriously ill, cyber terrorism, widespread civil unrest. Nuclear weapons, terrorism, on and on and on and on and on, to things like break-ins or devastating tornadoes or earthquakes or hurricanes. Or, it seems awfully weird to me, but out of all the list here, towards the end, we start, 74.5% worry about corrupt government officials, but down there, towards the end there, actually 20.3% worry about dying. That's significant to think about, that more people are concerned about a corrupt government than they are concerned about dying. And analysts have found that in preparing commercials and trying to lead elections, if people can begin to twist and use and manipulate fear, they can begin to change the minds of people and focus them in a certain direction or another. And I'm not here to make political statements. I just want you to understand that when fear is used, it can begin to change the way we view the world. It can begin to change the way we view others. It can begin to change the way we view the community that we live in. It changes everything. You see, fear emotionally, physically, and spiritually twists and knot us up inside. And so I want to talk to you guys about two phrases, okay? The first is, what if? What if? This is something familiar to the Christian journey, and we've been told this 100 of times. We've been taught that we should trust in God and all the facets of who He is and place our confidence in Him, whether He's silent or speaking. And this is likely something that we know as believers, or we've been told to believe, and we begin to question at times. We begin to wrestle at times. We begin to deliberate on these what-if experiences when things get confusing and people get sick. And if we're honest, if we're honest in our reflections of self, we will discover that we would say there have been situations in life where trust in God has been or becoming conditional. Could we say that, if we were to reflect on our own lives, could we look back and say, wow, my trust in God's character, my trust in His work, my trust in what He's doing has been questioned. I have become conditional in my trust in Him. Or in this current experience, is it becoming conditional? Did it become conditional already? Are you living in a place right now where you're saying, I trust you, God. I trust you, God, but it's based on the conditions of what's going on in my life. You see, we have this mentality sometimes. We get trapped when we're thinking of the future, of existing in an understanding of what if? What if. God, if, whatever you put the situation, or insert situation here, what if happens? You must not love me like I thought you did. Jesus, where are you, right? Do you even care? Do you even care? I mean, like, insert the situation. What if my family member contracts this illness? What if I find myself at a place of such, financial collapse, where everything is destroyed, where everything I put my trust in and my confidence is suddenly yanked out from under me? Like, whatever situation it is, whatever it is, like, what is this what if experience in our life? I mean, we feel great in God's faithfulness, right? Things are good. We get the promotion. We hold our future together. We have the baby we were praying for or hoping for. We believe when things are good, but what if? What happens? Our love for God and our trust in him should be not solely based on whether situations turn out the way we want them to. I mean, it's more easy. It's less complicated if we trust in God. It's less complicated when things go right. It's less complicated when things, it's less complicated when things aren't difficult, when things aren't challenging, when life is just kind of traveling on this pace and everything's good. You got a good job. Even if you don't necessarily have a good job, you're bringing in some income. Things are stable. Things are steady. Your family is in a good place. Your children are growing and healthy, or your children are grown and they're doing good. You're getting ready to have grandbabies. All this stuff. Everything seems so together, and we don't live in this fear. But what if happens? What if happens? I mean, like, I remember talking to a friend of mine, and I've shared this with you guys several times throughout this series and other times, but I was talking to them about a concern, and I said, well, what if? And this individual, he just looked at me and he said, okay, what if? What if? And in that, he looked at me and said, Seth, maybe you should say, even if. Not what if, but even if. Like to make this bold declaration that I'm not going to be scared of the what if. I'm actually going to have faith in God even if. Now, we find this exact term with a trio of individuals called Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and they were torn from their land, given different names, and King Nebuchadnezzar, all right, as my kids call him, King Nebi, was threatening to kill them if they didn't bow and worship an image made of himself. I mean, talk about arrogance, talk about narcissism. He's like, you worship this created image, or you're going to be burned. Not only burned, but you're going to be thrown into a fiery furnace. Now, that's terrifying to think about. I remember, it was like a month or so ago, maybe, it's probably a little bit longer than that. My wife and I were using our old grill. Thank God we were able to get a different grill, which isn't as dangerous, but, I'm preparing it. I turn the gas on. I'm like, okay, the starter isn't working right, so I'm just going to drop this match. And I mean, I dropped the match, and no lies, like, and he just like blows up in my face and singes my beard hair and my eyebrow hair and my eyelashes. And I'm like looking in the mirror and I'm like, whoa. I mean, like, I knew I needed a trim, but I didn't want to go about it this way. And I mean, can you just imagine, like, some of you have touched the hot pan in the oven without the oven mitt. It's happened to all of us. And you scream out in pain, and you realize that maybe a part of your your fingerprint will never be the same. It will never be the same because you got burned. I mean, you can imagine burns on that level, but imagine your entire body being thrown into a furnace. And so in Daniel chapter 3, we see this begin to unfold in verse 14. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, this is what he said. Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I have set up? All right? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then, what God will be able to rescue you from my power. I mean, it was a pretty awful time. You know, these kings and these rulers, they're like, you do this or you die. I mean, it was just that simple, that plain, that clear. You do this or you die. And then in verse 16, this is what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego says. They replied, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar." I love that it says, "oh." I'm not sure, like, if they're like, "oh," or "oh, Nebuchadnezzar." You know, I mean, like, I'm not sure how they approach this, but, like, can you imagine the boldness of this? Like, King Nebuchadnezzar, he is a mighty, mighty man, and he has established a statue and is making everybody worship it, and he threatens them with a threat of all threats. And they said, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you." I mean, them fighting words, right? Like, we don't need to defend ourselves among you. Like, who do you think you are, King Nebuchadnezzar? Like, who do you think you are to tell us what we need to do or who we need to worship? I'm all right. I serve God. I trust him. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, God, the God whom we serve, is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. Like, they just come out and say, I'm not worried about it. God's going to rescue. God's going to take care of us. God's going to release us of this. You're going to throw us in, and we're not going to cook. It is just not going to happen. The faith of that is so bold, so brave. And I've had moments like that where I've just reached out and believed. I think I saw in the comments that Lorette is watching. Lorette, I remember when I went to the hospital to visit your son, and I remember them saying, well, his kidneys are bad. He's going to be on dialysis the rest of his life. You know, things aren't going to go well, and you know, like, it's bad situation. I remember we got some anointing oil out. We prayed, and I was just like, you know, in my, you know, just bold honesty of the moment, I just said, God, that Patrick would pee first thing in the morning and his urine would be perfect. I know that just sounds weird, but that's how I prayed. And the next morning, they took a sample and everything was functioning as it was supposed to. So much so, he was in such a good place that he was released shortly after that. Like, I've had moments where I prayed for something to happen and everything changed. Everything changed. I remember my wife and I in one of our ministry positions in Dayton, Ohio, and we're broke. I mean, we're struggling, and we're just like, okay, God, we need you to do something powerful. I remember my wife saying, we need to sow this last bit of money we have and pray for $10,000. And I remember chuckling at her. Never laughed about her faith in the future, okay? But I prayed, you know, we prayed over what we put in the offering, and we're just like, okay, God, we're going to trust you to bless this. And we're going to ask God for $10,000. And we're going to ask for $10,000. And I kid you not, it wasn't even a week later, Saturday. Actually, it was a week later. Saturday, the day before Sunday, Saturday, I go out to the mailbox and I'm like, this is kind of funny. You know, what is that? You know, like, what is this? You know, I don't recognize this envelope. And I open the envelope, and I like fell to my knees where I was at. Like, what just, are you, you know, like, I was stuttering over my words because my wife prayed and believed that God would do something marvelous. And some of us, we're praying for that. We're praying for that. But in the very next statements that these gentlemen make to King Nebuchadnezzar, in verse 18, right, in 17, they're like, we got this. We're not worried about being thrown in the blazing furnace. God whom we serve is able to save us. We're good. He'll rescue us from your power, your majesty. You know, they're being respectful. I think they're being respectful, though. They're like, your majesty. I'm not sure if they were being kind of respectful or just like calling him by name or calling him out. But in verse 18, they said this, but even if he doesn't, we know he's going to do it, but even if he doesn't, like, that's not like you know, an escape clause or whatever. They're not saying that, oh, well, we believe this, but we don't really believe this isn't going to happen. No, their faith and confidence in God is so great that they said, but even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. We will never. And man, you want to talk about a furnace blazing. The furnace within King Nebuchadnezzar was burning. He was furious. He was angry. And as the story continues, he ordered the strongest men of the army to bind them up. All right, just kind of paraphrasing real quick, and throw them in. And he asked that the flames be built, the furnace be hotter than it was, so much so that when they threw them in, the soldiers that had taken him there to throw them in were burnt, and they were outside of the furnace. All right? And because of his anger, all right, because of the king, his anger had demanded such a hot fire, right, that it killed them as they were putting him in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied up, fell into the roaring flames. King Nebi like, ha-ha, what now? You are gone. And I'm sure at this moment, because of the furnace being so hot, that he was assuming that they were just ash, and perhaps not even that they would be completely consumed. But suddenly, Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to the advisors, "Didn't you tie the 3 men? Didn't you tie up the 3 men?" Okay, like it was one thing that he was asking, did you tie them up? Securely tied? All right, didn't you tie them up? Throw them into the furnace. Well, yes, Your Majesty, we certainly did. Scared, like, we did. In verse 25, "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire, unharmed. And the 4th looks like a god, likely Jesus, as some have looked at this, or an angel of some sort. But King Nebuchadnezzar looks into the furnace, and the guys are just walking around. Like, I mean, like it doesn't say they were standing around. They were walking around, all right? They were just walking around like, hey, what's going on? Look, you said we were going to be burned, but we're not burned. Hey, King Nebi, what's going on? How's it going? I mean, they're just walking around and chilling like everything's all right. And Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High, come out, come here." They stepped out. They stepped out of the fire. And the high officers, officials, and governors and advisors, all these officials crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Okay, not a hair on their head was singed. Not a hair on their head was singed. And their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell like smoke. Like King Nebuchadnezzar's like, okay, I can't get any closer. Come out! And they came out and they're like, hey, what's going on? They're like, okay, their hair's not burned. Their clothes aren't singed. And they don't even smell like fire. I mean, that's like a big deal. And then King Nebuchadnezzar's like, whoa. He says this statement, even though he had just told them to worship his God. He said, praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted him. And they defied the king's commands and were willing to die rather than serve or worship the God except their own God. He establishes the same thing they just said. God rescued them, but they were determined. They were willing to die. Like, King Nebuchadnezzar, we're not worshiping your God. We are willing to die. We are willing to lay down our life. Yes, God will rescue us, but even if he doesn't, but even if, we're okay with that. Therefore, I make a decree. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb. That's awful, but he was an awful king, okay? Like, there's no, like, condoning of behavior or whatever. I mean, he was just an awful king. He's like, look, if they don't worship this God, then, their God, then it's going to be bad for them. And their houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. There is no other God who can rescue like this. Before, he was telling them, worship my God or die. And now he's saying, there is no God like their God. There is no God like their God. This is a great story, one of undeniable power. And we saw the power unfold. We saw the power of their bold faith and how it changed the outcome. How they said, no, we're not going to do this. And in that moment, God rescued and freed them from the furnace. But they had a statement saying, even if will we discover a great faith that responds with to our current situation or others with an even if instead of a what if. They said, this is going to happen, but even if. God's going to preserve us. God's going to protect us. God's going to do wonderful things. But if it doesn't happen, even if we die, we're good with that. Like, where is your even if? Where's your even if when the tough situations happen? Even if I don't conceive the child I so desperately want, even if my family relationships don't improve, even if my financial struggle and collapse is not what it should be, even if these things do not get better, even if, will you trust God? Will you have faith? Yes, he's going to do some powerful things in your life, but you have to place confidence in the fact that there may be an even if, that you want to believe for big things, but even if. There's a 4-part strategy that I just want to mention to you real quick, and it's an acronym, so that's pretty cool because it's the word fear. All right, but F, face your fears with faith. We've got to remember who God is. In those moments where we move or transition from what if and we move to even if, we've got to say, okay, I'm going to face my fears with faith. I'm going to remember who God is. I'm going to remember who God is, what God has done, and what God is going to do. I'm going to remember that God is with us. I'm going to remember his character. I'm going to remember who he is. I'm going to fight my fear with faith. I'm going to fight my fear with faith. Faith that even says, in the blazing fire of my experiences, I'm going to trust God no matter what. No matter what comes, no matter what experience, what moment, what struggle, what dilemma. I'm going to face my fears with faith. I'm going to examine my assumptions, right? F, I'm going to face my fears with faith. E, I'm going to examine your assumptions in light of the facts. Check the basis and reality of your fear. All right? Check the basis of reality. Man, we are living in a time on social media. There's such clickbait, as they call it. You click on something, you open this link. It's not even true. It's not even a real website of news. And you're just reading, you're like, oh my goodness, I'm horrified and scary and frightened. Oh my gosh. I mean, there is so much floating around on the internet that can really instigate our fears. I mean, some people saw that the quarter was minted this year, 2020, with a bat on it. A bat. Some of you are like, oh my gosh, and you're already starting to look it up because you didn't know that. It's a government conspiracy, right? And this is nothing personal. I don't want you to be offended by that. I just want you to know that we have got to fact check. We've got to look back and stop making assumptions. We've got to examine our assumptions. We've got to attack our anxieties with action. Like you're just sitting back there and you're scared, you're nervous. Attack it with action. We are not powerless as we imagine. Often we can do something to be a part of the solution and not of the problem. You need to pray more. You need to read the scripture more. You need to watch messages more. You need to talk to others more. You need to just connect with people and begin to pray. Yes, I am anxious. I'm overwhelmed, but I'm going to attack my anxieties. I'm going to step up and I'm going to push back. I'm not going to let it hinder me. I'm not going to let it control me. You need to attack your anxieties with action, right? If you're going to move from what if to even if, you've got to face your fears with faith. You've got to examine your assumptions in light of the facts. You've got to attack your anxieties with action, and you need to release your cares to God. This is so important. So many of us have carrying around the baggage for so long that we even physically hunch over. It's worn our face down. We're just tired. We're moving around. And we just don't feel like we have enough left. We don't feel like we have enough to get through it. We don't feel like we have enough to get to the other side. But we've got to release our cares to God. Yeah, I'm going to face my fears with faith. I'm going to examine my assumptions with the facts. I'm going to attack my anxieties with action. But at the end of the day, sometimes all those things that we're doing on our own just come to such serious conflict. We hit a wall after a wall after a wall. And some of us are like, we shouldn't give up. And I'm not telling you to give up, but sometimes we should say, you know what? I'm just going to release it. Done. It's yours. I quit, God. I quit trying. I quit fighting so hard in my own strength and my own work and my own ideas. It's yours. Give it to God. Release your cares. You got to trust him with your cares and lives, knowing that God ultimately prevails. That God ultimately prevails. Again, face your fears with faith. Examine your assumptions in light of the facts. Attack your anxieties with action and release your cares to God. And so I want to ask 4 questions in relation to these 4 things I just said to you. And I want you to do something about it. What fear do you need to face? Simple as that. What fear do you need to face? Right now, what fear do you need to face? What fear is it? What assumptions need to be addressed with the facts? You know, some of us are kind of doubtful about absolute truth, but I tell you right now, this book, it is truth and it is absolute. You know, you want to talk about facing your assumptions with the facts? Yes, fact check news stories, but you better fact check life and your experience and your moments and your thoughts about who God is, and make sure that it is not a manipulated, distorted view by addressing it by saying, okay, I heard somebody say it this way, but I got to look in here to make sure it's not, you know, because it's not that way, it's actually this way. What anxiety needs to be attacked, right? What fear do you need to face? What assumptions need to be addressed with the facts? What anxiety needs to be attacked? And what cares have you yet to release to God? That last one, man. Some of you, you just got to say, okay. You got to take a deep breath, and you're like, I'm just going to release it. I'm just going to release it. I'm going to release it. And you give it to God completely. As you face the future. As you face the future. Pray for just that right now. That we would experience peace. That we would experience complete and total peace. And Father, as we see the fear that we need to face, God, that you would help us, that you would empower us to overwhelm our assumptions, that you would give us power to attack our anxieties. But God, right now I pray that as your Son Jesus came to set us free, that we would recognize that in one moment we can just say, Jesus, I need you. Come to my life, come into my life. Surrender to you. And I follow you. And just like that, all of our sin is immediately released. All of our fears are immediately released. Lord, may today be a profound moment of life change. That you would be noticed for who you